Welcome to another inspiring episode of our Leadership and Development podcast, The Growth Leaders. Today, we are honored to have a distinguished guest whose expertise and experience in the realms of human resources in information technology, science, and consulting are truly unparalleled. Please join us in welcoming Selina Millstam, the Global Head of People and Organization Growth at Merck. Merck is one of the oldest pharmaceutical and chemical companies from 1668, founded by Friedrich Jakob Merck. A great company with about 65,000 employees. Selina, recently coming from a global telecommunication company, headed the global talent management with 110,000 employees. She has a remarkable track record of driving transformative change and fostering leadership excellence across diverse industries. Join us for an inspiring conversation with Selina as she shares her journey and the vision for future leaders. Welcome, Selina, to Growth Leaders Podcast.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the kind words. Very humbling.
I'm super excited to talk with you here. And I'm going to jump straight into, now it's more or less exactly 12 months since you entered the doors into a new company, Merck. New employees, new technology. And my question to you, how did you approach your first 100 days entering those doors?
Well, fortunately, for better or for worse, I got to approach him in the way I like best, which is to roll up my sleeves and get on with things and really get up doing the work. So I came in and there was a project that needed support and actually a significant change in how they were approaching it. And I either could have spent those first 100 days doing the interviews, getting to know people, having meetings and coffee, which can be helpful. But for me, doing the work together side by side, drinking the coffee while we were actually doing the work instead of just the relationship piece was a great way to start off my career at Merck.
And what kind of team do you have around you today at Merck?
So fortunately, very similar to how I was at Ericsson, I have a group of very smart, talented, very engaged individuals who really believe in the purpose of the organization and really take on both the responsibility and the weight of that and the passion around being able to work with leaders to help the employee experience of all employees to be better. So that engagement, that openness, and that real commitment has been a real help in my sense of a strong sense of belonging from the very beginning.
And I presume you also have now, your team is more or less all over the world.
I have a global team, very diverse team sitting in all the geographies. And so we're definitely, navigating both the opportunities and of course challenges of having a geographically dislocated team.
So I'm going to ask you, which is a little bit outside, but one of the questions which I get sometimes, because I believe it's really important also as a leader when you run a lot of team meetings and similar, but it's actually being able to see, so how are you doing? Because people do get tired, people do have their own problems, and people could feel joyful, etc. But identifying that also, for me, I think that works really well. What is your view on that?
You mean in terms of holding some space, even in the execution meetings, to actually do that informal?
When you have a follow-up with one of your employees or with colleagues, you can see how they are feeling and how that's working, especially employees.
Yeah, my experience is that with most things, intentionality is really helpful here. So sometimes just the informal ask is nice, but I also think time is an important indicator. So I think sometimes having a very significant chunk of a meeting that's perhaps a team meeting, but designated to free questions, to free inquiry, to really say, there is no space or agenda in this first 30 minutes of the meeting, but it's really for us actually to be together. I also love the tool of silence. I think very often, whether it's in the work environment, in a meeting, or in a development experience, we're asked to say, okay, you have 5 minutes. Think about what's the most important thing in your life and come up with 3 points about, what you're going to do to deliver on that, and make sure you're staying true to your purpose and executing. It's like 5 minutes, it's like, it's not enough time. So I think actually sometimes being comfortable with letting people, if you ask a deep question and giving them actually a few moments to genuinely reflect, instead of filling the silence because you're uncomfortable yourself, is a great tool, particularly in a digital environment where you don't always get the physical cues, or, as you say, just the informal movements that we do when we are a person.
So when you look now back for the first 12 months, without being confidential in any way, what do you see as the accomplishment by you and your team, and then, of course, people around, and what to come? Can you see any patterns, or maybe, as you say, there's direct positive, which you can see is moving forward without being confident and going into confidentiality?
No, I mean, I think for me, in our area, I like to be as transparent as possible. I think if we're true to the nature of the work that we do, it is about sharing what we learn, and trying to support others to make less mistakes than we did. I continue to make lots of mistakes, but try to pull in. I had the benefit of learning a tremendous amount at Ericsson, having experience with global teams, doing significant transformation. So what I've tried to do is pull what went really well, share what didn't go so well, so we can avoid those. Now we're making new mistakes of our own, but hopefully not the mistakes we made. So we have been able to implement a new way of doing succession management and thinking about the whole talent. We have launched a new way of looking at high potentials and working with high potentials in a much more intentional and thoughtful way. We are looking at how we're looking at talent acquisition and that whole experience, candidate experience, manager experience, employee experience, particularly in light of generative AI, and really pushing ourselves to evolve our ways of working in that space. And we just had a great launch in our CEO town hall yesterday of actually our open talent market, which is called My Growth. And it's an AI-enabled platform, but really a mind shift on how we're creating our skills-powered organization, bringing greater transparency and fairness to every employee's line of sight to what's expected of them, what we as a company see are the skills of the future. So really giving people the driver's seat of their career and making it much more transparent.
And that sounds a lot more than using AI for performance appraisals. This sounds like a much bigger, and it's your own project or Merck projects.
Absolutely. Yes. So
that's super interesting.
The team is super talented and excited, working across functional. I mean, working very closely with our AI team, our digital team, to really not say, oh, this is something from HR, but this is something from Merck, the company, to create the fertile ground for every employee. And I think that's been a very important sentiment for us, that this is not about an HR project. This is a business project to support every employee.
And that really also gained the interest for those guys and girls who have that interest to deep dive into that opportunity. One thing which I see when I look at you, which I think you're burning for, and that is team development, team performance, team integration. And there are, of course, different levels of team, because you've been running also at Ericsson, the global leadership and executive management team there. But what ingredients do you see are really important to get the teams to really do well? Openness you've been talking about, but let's continue.
Yeah, I think I think one of the most important things is clarity on expectations. And I think being clear around what good looks like is incredibly important. It's sort of in performance management where you spend all this time calibrating performance ratings, but no time calibrating goals and expectations. So from my perspective, calibration of ratings or assessments, if you haven't done the calibration before, is useless. So being very clear on what's expected and what good looks like. With that, having very much of a coaching mentality or perspective on it. Not necessarily to be a coach per se, because I think that's a very skilled area where somebody has very specific training, but having a coaching orientation. So it's not around somebody failing or doing something wrong, but if we look at things as experiments. So from that clarity, then let's experiment. What do we get from experiments? We get data. What do we do with data? We make better, more informed decisions, and it allows us to pivot. So that combination of being very clear, having a coaching orientation, and then this sentiment of experimentation versus being right or wrong, and then that really feeding back into the lead. I actually also think, well, I'm very driven and I have high expectations of everyone else, never higher than I have of myself, but I also think life is short and we should have some humor in everything. And I think not taking ourselves too seriously is an important element of that.
That also show them who you are also, absolutely. Humble of the situations.
Exactly.
Okay, but do you see difference in development team, and then if you take an executive team, how you would approach those two? Because there are a little bit different challenges in there, I would say. I don't know if that's something just to reflect upon, or you see it's the same foundation on both. Different questions, maybe.
It's interesting. I think fundamentally it's similar. I mean, I think anything working together, and as I like to say with change, for me, the biggest difference between being successful and unsuccessful comes in being able to articulate around what informed the decisions you're making. Because most people can get on board with lots of things, even if they don't agree very much. So whether it's an executive population or managing a project team, to be clear on the why and then clear on where we're headed, I think is consistent regardless of where you are in the organization from a hierarchical perspective. That clarity and transparency of the why, I think, is the key for most situations.
Yeah, that's great. Useful to that. I think that is small steering all the time, but that's for sure. But when I spoke to you with you last time, you also said something which I reflected on quite a lot, but that is training leaders to actually make decisions, informed decisions, but also not being afraid of making a decision because of the organization or the culture or whatever. Is that something you also are working on in your, maybe that's always ongoing?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, I think the fortunate thing is that Merck has a really strong belief in leaders and investing leaders. And why? Similar to other organizations I've worked on, they do fundamentally believe that leaders are the driving force of a culture. And so we do not have a leadership crisis issue. It's one of our highest rated dimensions on our engagement survey. That said, it's like farming. It's never around just stopping. Okay, it's fine. There's a constant need for fertilization, for attention, for growth and nurturing. And so we are getting the buy-in and investment from the organization to be very thoughtful and intentional around the development. I mean, as you know, Peter, leadership, being a leader in an organization continues to be more complex, whether it's this sentiment of translating the strategy from the enterprise level to the unit, to the team, to the individual, to being a coach, to being a mentor, to sometimes being a therapist, to be navigating the external world with geopolitical challenges, social challenges, mental health issues and challenges, that we really need to be taking care of our leaders. Otherwise, the world is going to have a leadership crisis. Maybe we are having that already around. It's too tough. It's too complicated. So we need to make sure we're support. And I think this new era with Gen AI, I just see so many beautiful opportunities for us to leverage the technology to able to support leaders to really focus on the important stuff, which is that humanness, that intimacy, and that true connection. So that is what we will be focusing on. We're saying, so doing those experiments and having that freedom is just really exciting right now at this cusp of merging thoughtful, intentional learning and development, leadership development, and what generative AI can bring us.
I think that AI team, they must love you. Yeah, it's so dryly thinking. So, Selina, who are you outside work?
Who am I outside work? That was a deep question, Peter. Well, I think I'm actually the same person outside work. I'm very purpose driven. So I didn't mention that before, but I've been very working with my own purpose for at least 15 years. Which for me was a very important journey I took, going from something that I felt was very smart and had a lot of corporate language about my purpose and felt very like, okay, now I've made it, to getting some really honest and direct feedback of what total bullshit it sounded like, but okay, if that's what you say your purpose is, which really inspired and led me to get to the heart of my purpose, which is not a purpose that's related to work. It's a purpose for me for life. And my purpose is to help others to get to the top of their tree so they can enjoy their view. And as I'm reflecting, I can see I got from a present from some of my old colleagues. And it's hard to see, but it's sort of like these cartoons that illustrate that purpose and helping others to get to the top of their tree. So I think at work and at home, that is the purpose I live. I'm American, been a love refugee in Sweden for over 20 years. I have 2 teenage kids that teach me all sorts of things and challenge me every day.
It's good, isn't it? Yes.
So being in the outdoors is my space. So I believe
are you a sports girl also?
Well, I love sports, yes.
Yeah.
In previous lives, I was doing a lot of climbing and mountain biking. Now I'm doing running and walking and nature and Pilates. And for me, that discipline between keeping myself physically healthy, which helps with mental health, which helps for me from a productivity and I think being a better person. So for me, having that congruence in life is very important.
I had an interview yesterday with an Indian woman, and there were some similarities. She has started an organization which is called Million Moms. They've been training now 1 million moms for better health, for understanding the financial security. But the interesting with that approach, because we know there's some difference in how you run families in India than how we do it here. But the approach was really towards the kids, what they wanted their mom to be. And then the next step, it was towards their husband. And you have giving wings, which is similarity, what I can understand. So I guess that's a project which you're voting for, and I understand also it may start better than I started in your ideas a long time ago.
Yeah. So I sit on the board of a foundation, which is Giving Wings, the case for her. And it's a small group of women here in Sweden who are really changing global policy, and I mean policy around the world, around reproduction health, menstrual health, sexual health for women. And I'm extremely proud of my association with that organization, because the work they're doing is not only changing lives of individuals, but really of millions, because of the investment and time that they've committed to policy change. Because while we know that there's something very beautiful about being on the ground and making change, which they're also doing, to make the significant impact, we have to be there where the money is, where the influencers are, and quite frankly, those who are making the policies and legislation in different countries. And so I think one of the unique things that the founders have really committed to is investing in the back work, and then having that partnership. And one of the strongest partnerships we have is an impact investment organization called Acumen Fund, based in the US, and that very much aligned with our beliefs around impact investing. So I just think it's a really beautiful reflection of what a group of small, committed, passionate people can achieve.
Yeah. And the reflection is there's a long way to go still in the majority of countries, at least from our perspective. So how is it with Merck? I know in Ericsson it was about 75-25, something like that. Men versus women in leadership. And I know you had big programs there to give them the foundation to grow into new roles. And when I see here in Swedish manufacturing companies, their stuff is 20-80. And then you take tech companies, then it's about 50-50.
Yeah. So we are just under 40% women. Okay. We have an aspiration to get to 45, and further, of course. I think that we have made, I think that the interesting thing with diversity is, first, diversity without inclusion, in my experience, isn't particularly helpful. So I think it's really excellent that we have a focus on inclusion. So how are we actually listening? How are we creating that psychological safety? Then we're also using data at the inflection point of decisions to increase our diversity and inclusion. So what we found, and what I also learned from Ericsson, is that we're heavily biased, right? We want to make good decisions, but sometimes in that moment, it's much easier to choose the person who is like me. And if we give data about how people have hiring decisions in the past for that individual, for the unit, they're able to make much more thoughtful decisions, which we have seen has led to greater diversity, not for diversity's sake, but because we recognize the biases that were happening in our decision-making processes. So we're very proud of the progress that we made, and we're not satisfied. So there's going to always be more work to do.
We're using the diversity, inclusion, and belonging as the three words coming together. I know you're also, how do you approach mentorship? I guess we have already talked about that, especially now with the AI approach on the coaching, but then you have the formal mentorship when you get guys and girls into an organization. How important is that for bringing in new talent into the organization? Is that something which you think is important?
Well, the My Growth project that we launched yesterday had the concept of mentoring as one of its key areas. And why do we do that? It goes back to this point around democratizing. So it's not just the few people who know the few people who are in the right place at the right time, but we have embedded it now in the platform we have. So truly you can see the skills and abilities of people across the organization and then reach out to them. Now, they might not accept, but at least you have that opportunity. And we had a beautiful demonstration of that, of our CEO choosing live a mentor that, of course, is not senior than her. So removing that it must be a hierarchical piece. That mentorship comes from many different places, and that we can learn from many different people without it being a hierarchical piece. I personally still encourage people, I mean, if we take the technology away from it, to not wait for a mentor, to not wait for being in an organization where there's a mentor program that matches. I think those are great and they can be extremely helpful. But my personal experience is that I never waited. I met people who I thought were fantastic and amazing. And I don't recall saying, will you be my mentor? But I asked questions of inquiry. I invited them for coffee. I followed up on conversations. And the mentorship that I received in particularly those critical years of my earlier career, I'm still in contact with those people, and their voices can still inform me in a meeting that I have today. What would so-and-so think or say or do, or how would they advise me? So I would encourage anybody in any level in an organization, or wherever you are in your career, that take away almost like, oh, I'm going to find a mentor, but seeking mentorship is such a lovely way to engage. Asking true questions of inquiry, where that ladder of inquiry and advocacy can come to life. To be honest, that's where you also build friendships.
And that is really an implicit way of doing it. And I think people actually reckon when someone is looking for mentorship and advices, and they feel proud of that too. So I think there's a win-win on both sides.
Absolutely.
And that really comes into my final question. What advice should we give, and what should you give to leaders just getting into the role and leaders on a journey? I think this one is a great one. Asking those questions for people to help you in your own thinking and goals. What else are your keys as an advice?
So my advice is very consistent. So I'm not saying anything new that I haven't said before, and it's some very basic things. First, I encourage people just starting on their career, leaders at inflection points, anyone, to be very clear about what you stand for. So ethical, responsible business practice is very important to me. And in complex environments, in complex organizations, cognitive dissonance can set in, and sometimes things get gray. So it's very important to be very clear about your own values, what you stand for, what you believe in. It really helps from a decision perspective. The other side of that coin, which is equally as important, is what you don't stand for. Whether it's behavior, whether it's situations, whether you're in a job with a boss that isn't aligned with your values, or an organization or colleagues. What is the behavior? What is the language? What is the interaction? What is the commitment needed from a job versus the commitment to your family versus the commitment to your friends or pets or etc. Be very clear about what you don't stand for, because those are the things that actually, in my experience, really wear on the mental health of individuals. And then the third sort of leg of that is to be clear about who you stand with. I've been through enough organizational transformations now that there is sometimes this, when key members leave, then all of a sudden, oh yeah, no, it was she who did that, or he who did that. if you're clear about what you stand for and what you don't stand for, also be clear about who are the relationships you have and who it is that you really will stand up and fight for. And don't compromise on that, because those are what define you as a person in terms of really standing up. And my last flippant part, which is not part of that stool, which is but is informed by those three things, which is I go to work not being afraid to getting fired. And that's different than wanting to get fired or trying to get fired.
Yes, of course.
But because I know what I stand for and what I know what I don't stand for, having that ethical and responsible business, having a clear compass, being clear around what's the balance for me with my family. So this idea of work-life balance, I think, is almost a plague for us, because it sounds like it's one recipe for everybody, but it's different for everyone. So for me, I know where that is, and I'm prepared to get fired, whether it's taking a decision because I don't think it's ethical and responsible, or not being aligned with my values, or impeding on the current needs that I have based on my personal experience. That's the advice I give. And hopefully then we learn from whatever comes our way.
And also, as you say, real life, when you actually step in the wrong place and reflect upon that. You know what, Selina? I love talking to you. I could have continued for a long time, but this is what we're going to do. And it's so beautiful talking to you. So thank you so much for being part of the Growth Leaders today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.